Welcome back to the Carbon Trust Route to Net Zero Europe event. And you might be wondering how ordinary people can help with the pledge to reach net zero. Well, you've come to the right place. This session is called Demonstrating Action and Providing Transparency to Consumers. And Paula Schmitzfelden from the Carbon Trust is here to discuss real-life case studies and the role of the consumer, as well as managing transparency and communicating your carbon credentials. Paula, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Hello, and a very warm welcome to everyone from my side as well. It's my great pleasure to now kick off our next session of the day, demonstrating action and providing transparency to consumers on their route to net zero. So over the next hour or so, we'll be able to listen in on 4 case studies delivered by a range of fantastic industry experts. All of you will have observed sort of the latest debates on corporate claims, particularly within the European market. So we're seeing an increase in these corporate pledges, in these claims, but also in the attention from the side of the consumer and the scrutiny that these pledges are facing, the need for transparency. So this session very much focuses on the role of the consumer and how a company can take valuable action, but most importantly, communicate this with transparency and with confidence. So how can you talk about your sustainability roadmap, your carbon credentials in a meaningful way? How do you communicate this to the consumer? So these are just some of the questions that we want to be answering today. So together with our speakers, we'll be exploring examples of demonstrable action and how you can talk about your journey to net zero to your consumers. So to start this off, we'd like to set the scene with a little video on showing your commitment. Great. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker for this session. Bethan Loughlin is the Sustainable Consumption Lead at Consumers International. Consumers International is a global member organization for consumer advocates around the world, bringing together over 200 organizations in more than 100 countries. And their aim is to sort of empower and champion the rights of consumers, which is really just what we want to be talking about today. So Consumers International works with its members, with its partners, to build a world where everyone has access to fair, to safe and sustainable products and services alongside a global economy that works for both people and the planet. And Bethan leads their work on sustainability, but she also leads the Consumer Information Program for Sustainable Consumption Production, which is part of the UN One Planet Network, and which is dedicated to the Sustainable Development Goal 12, responsible consumption and production. So we'll now hear from Bethan on topics like the role of the consumer, but also her takeaways from this year's COP26.
It is a pleasure to be speaking with you all today. My name is Bethan Loughlin and I'm here representing Consumers International, where I lead our work on sustainable consumption. Thank you to the Carbon Trust for the kind offer of having me speak today. It's such a pleasure to be able to share our work on this vital topic. This section of today's agenda is going to be focused on the role of consumers on the route to net zero and what's needed to enable the change we need to see. But before we dive into those specifics, I'm just going to take a couple of moments to introduce you to what we do at Consumers International and how our work relates to sustainability. This is just so you can get an idea of what it means when we're talking about sustainable consumption, consumer rights, and the road to net zero. So let's dive in. So we are the global membership organization for consumer advocates around the world. We bring together 200 member organizations across 100 countries to empower and champion the rights of consumers everywhere. In 2020, we celebrated our 60th anniversary, and throughout those 60 years, we have represented the independent consumer voice throughout international policymaking forums and the global marketplace to ensure that all consumers are treated safely, fairly, and honestly. We believe in and we are focused on building a world where everyone has access to safe, fair, and sustainable products and services, and where our economic system works best for people and planet by protecting and empowering consumers. We do this through a variety of mechanisms, if that be through impactful projects, dialogues, research, insight, supporting the development of standards, advocacy, campaigning, convening youth voices, and influencing policymaking at an international, regional, and national level. Alongside this, we also work in partnership with select businesses for specific projects to innovate for change across the marketplace. This slide gives you a little bit of insight into what representing the consumer voice on the global stage really looks like. If it be from having general consultative status with the United Nations to leading the Consumer Information Programme for Sustainable Consumption and Production at UNEP, which is something myself and my team work very closely on, or if it's advising the International Standards Organization on the creation of new standards. It even includes our historic work with UNCTAD, where we not only created and helped build the first UN guidelines on consumer protection, but also helped update them to include sustainability in 1999 and 2015. We have a long and varied history with engaging with some of the most important consumer issues, including sustainability, focused on consumer rights and consumer protection. And most recently, we were at Glasgow at the COP26 conference. And it's at that point I want to bring us back to the focus of this session. How can we demonstrate action and enable consumers on the road to net zero? Because while we were present at COP, amid the hubbub of the negotiations and the side events, our team observed that there seemed to be a rather large consumer-based hole in both the formal negotiations and the myriad of side events taking place. Our formal side event was one of only a few to look at the role of consumers in behaviour change and mobilising large-scale decarbonisation. And that's an issue, because consumers represent not only an opportunity to speed up the net zero transition, but they are in fact an essential component of us successfully reaching a net zero world. Following COP, it's now estimated that 90% of the world is covered by a net zero pledge of some kind. This is up from 30% just 3 years ago. So as leaders departed COP with new pledges and agreements and pressure from the international community to do more, we are left with an important question. How can we turn these pledges and promises into implementable and impactful policy? The scale of the challenge ahead of us is vast, to say the least, so we need to look pragmatically at the methods and mechanisms of how we can make this change happen on a global scale. Reaching net zero emissions will require all economic actors across all sectors to make transformational changes in the way they operate. This includes the largest group of actors in the world, consumers. We are all consumers of products and services, all part of a connected global marketplace. And as consumers, we all hold enormous potential to drive tipping points for change. Economy-wide transformation will require establishing new patterns of consumption and production, which will sometimes, if not often, require shifts in consumer behaviour. Consumers everywhere, all of us, will have to make changes in how we travel, save money, cool and power our homes, the food we eat, the products we buy, and how we spend and save. These changes will only happen if consumers are supported and enabled by other actors in the marketplace. So we need to start thinking seriously about the role of consumers and behaviour change in how to make net zero a reality. This is a rather brilliant dataset from the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies from a report they published in 2019. And the report assessed the greenhouse gas emissions and reduction potential by looking at emissions associated with lifestyle including emissions both directly emitted by and directly induced from households. It highlighted that in order for us to reach net zero, countries in the global north, in developed countries, will have to lower their emissions between 80 and 93%, and countries in the global south will have to lower their emissions by 23 to 84%, obviously depending on country context and situation. Looking at where emissions come from, it's clear that consumers everywhere will have to make changes in the way we live. However, according to a survey that we conducted with our membership earlier this year, 9 in 10 consumer advocates say that their governments are simply not doing enough to help consumers lower their carbon impact. Additionally, sustainable consumption behaviour is often downplayed in the analysis of climate change mitigation for meeting international targets and policy. And thus far, policymakers have not properly considered the impact that consumers can make and the importance of accelerating behaviour change for us to reach mass decarbonisation. Datasets like this make clear that this theme of downplaying the role of consumers will need to change to make net zero a reality. So, how do we make it happen? Let's take the next few minutes to look at some solutions. What we need is an ecosystem of solutions. We need not only ambitious government policy, not only innovative business leadership, but those two things in collaboration with empowered, protected consumers. This in turn can create a sort of ecosystem of change. But vital to this point is that we need to understand that although consumers are powerful economic and social actors, the burden of responsibility for both the climate crisis and climate solutions cannot and should not rest solely on the shoulders of consumers. The changes we need to see will only happen if consumers are supported by other actors in the marketplace and businesses, along with ambitious government policy that strengthens consumer rights and maintains consumer confidence. In light of the need for a consumer-centred transition, we have been working with our members and our global network of consumer experts to better understand this issue and gather insights around what consumers need and how they understand sustainability. These are just a few of the many insights that we uncovered, but I wanted to share them with you today because I think they're really interesting. For example, we found that 94% of consumer advocacy organisations are reporting that environmental sustainability has become of key importance to consumers in their countries. In essence, consumers are increasingly caring about sustainability. However, there are huge barriers in place. A part of that barrier is understanding. 2/3 of consumer advocates say that consumers are not very aware or completely unaware of the climate impact of the goods that they buy. And this is in turn made worse by the fact that a lot of consumers, 69% in fact, say that availability is a key barrier to being able to access sustainable goods and services. There is a need for multi-stakeholder collaboration across business and policy and civic society to reduce these barriers and to embed consumers in the consultation and policy building process. Inspired by many of these findings and lots more, we worked with our members to create our consumer call for action, which launched at COP26 and contains a series of marketplace recommendations on the change that's needed for consumers in the net zero world. The consumer call to action is made up of 3 foundational pillars, which you can see on your screen, and then 6 calls to action. So I'm going to take us through the foundational pillars really quickly. First, what we need is a transition that is fast, fair, and accountable. It needs to be fast because the climate crisis is happening now, and we need to move quickly. It needs to be fair because the most vulnerable consumers need to be supported in making changes and protected from unfair financial burdens. Change must begin with action from those high-emitting industries. Again, the burden of responsibility needs to be shared equitably. And finally, accountability. Consumers need to be represented and listened to in decision-making. They have a lot of insight to be able to share, and it's a missed opportunity to exclude them. We then moved on to building some 6 key areas of change. These are transport, energy, consumption, food, residential heating and cooling, and finance. Now, in the main report, we go into lots of detail on these areas, along with highlighting the work of our members on the ground, on what they're doing in engaging with decarbonisation strategies. But just for this short presentation, I thought I'd zoom in on two of the recommendations in particular, what we buy and how we live. So let's start with what we buy. Manufactured goods, materials, the clothes we wear, the books we read, the plastics that we use, the laptop that you may be watching this on, account for nearly a third of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. How consumers buy, use, and dispose of consumer products is therefore fundamental to reduce carbon emissions. Consumers increasingly care about sustainability and report that they're willing to change their purchasing behaviour accordingly. However, they also report that consumers are expecting that more and more products be sustainable and low carbon by default. So as such, we need to support consumers in accessing sustainable goods and services. So we're calling on legislation that puts in place right to repair legislation and that businesses work to implement it. We're calling on action to promote and innovate the circular economy to make it a reality. And centrally, what's really important is that information to consumers on climate and biodiversity impact should be transparent at all times. And we take an international strong stand against greenwashing. There are too many green claims in the marketplace that are used to mislead and lie to consumers about the green credentials of their products. And not only does misleading consumer information around sustainability represent poor practice, it's also shown to erode consumer trust in the long term. Claims made on the sustainability of a product should be backed up by action, monitoring, and reporting. Finally, let's look at how we live. Buildings alone account for more than 40% of all human-created greenhouse gas emissions, and 20% of that is residential homes. Our homes emit carbon in two main ways: when we build them through the cement and the steel, and when we use them through heating and air conditioning, along with energy. So when buying or renting a new home, consumers need to feel confident that it was built to the highest low carbon standard, that sustainability was the default. And this is all the more important when we understand that consumers don't really understand at the moment the carbon impact of the homes they live in. In a survey that we conducted, we found that half of consumer advocates say that consumers are unaware of the climate impact of domestic heating and cooling. Consumers need to be supported through grants to support in the installing of new boilers and heating systems, retrofits, and economic support needs to be in place to make this a reality for low-income consumers. Additionally, in an ever-warming world, keeping our homes cool and safe will be increasingly complex. The world already has 1.6 billion air conditioners in use. And if temperature continues to rise at its current rate, it's estimated that's going to get to 5.6 billion by 2050. So that would represent 25% of our current energy being used just to power air conditioners. As such, consumers need to be supported via urban areas and homes being designed with natural cooling in place, and really strict efficiency standards in place for new cooling technology that comes onto the market. These 6 consumer areas need to be led by not only policy but also business. Moving forward, it's clear that only through the creation of a vibrant ecosystem of public-private partnerships will we see the change that's possible. But it needs to be understood that consumers cannot simply be seen as a passive part of the marketplace, but instead a vibrant and active member. Finally, it's important that sustainability become the default for consumers, regardless of location or economic mobility. Access, affordability, transparency are all paramount, alongside large-scale transformations in supply chains towards circularity. Without sustainable consumption and production being embedded into supply chains, And without consumer behaviour being mobilised, the likelihood of us reaching net zero is minimal. So I'm going to leave you with one final question for your organisation. Will reaching net zero be possible without consumer action? And if the answer is no, what actions can you take to put consumers at the centre? Thank you for your time. I hope you will join us all in working towards a net zero transition that is fast, fair, and accountable for everyone. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Bethan. Yeah, some great insights on the role of the consumer and how important this is for really any organization's route to net zero. Now, with that in mind, how do you then put this into action, and what does this look like in practice? How can you as a company implement that into the way you do business and also talk about it externally? We've also had a question from the audience on consumption behavior. So our next speaker and case study will touch on just that. I'm very pleased to now introduce you to Rachel Pretorius. Rachel is the Director of Sustainability for Amazon Devices and Services. And as such, she focuses on defining but also implementing a roadmap for devices to achieve net zero. So establishing short and long-term goals for sustainable product design, but also assessing the environmental impact of Amazon's devices along the way. So Rachel, a mechanical engineer by training, is passionate, as you'll see just in a second, about solving hard problems that better the lives of employees, but also customers. So we'll now hear from her on how Amazon tackles their net zero roadmap, but also how carbon labeling enables them to demonstrate this to their consumers.
Hello, thanks so much for having me today. My name is Rachel Pretorius, and I'm the Director of Sustainability for Amazon Devices and Services. It is my role to measure the environmental impact of our broad portfolio of consumer electronic devices and define and implement a path to net zero. So today I'm going to talk about our mental model for decarbonizing the devices business and how we've embedded sustainability into everything we do. Before I start that, I want to start with an overview of Amazon's overall commitment to sustainability. So in September 2019, Amazon co-founded and signed the Climate Pledge, which is a commitment to achieve net zero carbon by 2040, 10 years ahead of the Paris Climate Agreement. And this commitment includes three parts. First, we have to measure and report our carbon footprint on a regular cadence, and for Amazon, that's annually. Second, we need to employ real carbon elimination strategies across the life cycle of our products, our services, and our operations. And that's where I'll spend most of my time talking about today. And last, once we've maximized carbon elimination strategies, we'll purchase credible nature and technology-based offsets to get to net zero carbon. We're really proud that to date, over 200 companies have joined us in signing the Climate Pledge. So what does this mean for a company of Amazon's scale and breadth? How do we build a path to net zero? Well, a big part of our emissions is energy consumed by our operations. And so we've made a commitment to be 100% renewable energy by 2025, which is 5 years ahead of our original schedule. Shipment zero is our commitment to make half of all shipments net zero by 2030. And one of the ways we're doing that is by deploying 100,000 electric delivery vehicles by 2030. We also recognize that we simply can't do this on our own, and we have several funds, including the Climate Pledge Fund, aimed at investing $2 billion in supporting decarbonization technologies and services. And this is only a small cross-section of actions that we're taking across Amazon. And actually, the area that I'm going to be talking about is how we're approaching decarbonizing our physical products, our consumer electronic devices. So what is Amazon Devices? What does this cover? So I'm going to give you a little bit of history on devices, consumer electronics at Amazon. So this gives you the scale of the complexity, a sense of the scale of complexity of our business. The mission of Amazon Devices and Services is to enrich customers' lives with device and service inventions that inform, entertain, and connect. We began in 2007 with the challenge to reinvent the reading experience with Kindle. It was our first consumer electronic device. When I joined the company in 2013, we were shipping Fire tablets and Kindles. And then in 2014, we introduced Alexa to the world with the first Echo, and Fire TV launched that year as well. So if you fast forward a little bit, in the last few years, we've expanded to even more product categories that can fit in one picture, and we're shipping in 20 different geographies. Our product portfolio is diverse and continues to grow in new categories to meet our mission. We just keep innovating on behalf of our customers. And I've seen firsthand how helpful these products can be in customers' lives, but I also recognize that they have an impact on the planet. And as part of our commitment to the Climate Pledge, it's critical that we find innovative ways to decarbonize not just our business, but our hardware products as well. And with the breadth of product types that you see here, you can imagine what a challenge this is. To be successful, we knew we had to build sustainable design practices and metrics into our development process at every stage from start to finish. But this type of systemic change can't succeed at a scale like Amazon without true mechanisms and incentives. And one of the most meaningful carrots that Amazon has created for all brands to build products more sustainably is the Climate Pledge Friendly program, which launched last year in 2020. In the US and EU5, Amazon is now badging and promoting products on Amazon.com that have achieved one of a select set of sustainability certifications. This makes it easier for customers to identify and shop for products that match their values. It's a great example of things we can do as a retailer to help customers make more sustainable choices. And what we found is that this program has created a powerful incentive for our own products to meet this bar in a way that's much more tangible than the broader Climate Pledge goal. It translates that big goal into discrete targets at the product level. And this has enabled us to build robust mechanisms and very specific goals for each of our devices. So how do we determine if a product is Climate Pledge friendly? Well, it has to achieve one or more of these sustainability-focused certifications, and more certifications continue to be added over time. And these credible third-party certifications span many different product categories and sustainability vectors. Some are more focused on carbon, some on agricultural practices, some on forestry. It really depends on the product category. The idea is that each of these certifications raises the bar in an important aspect of sustainability, so it moves the needle in the right direction. For Amazon devices, we decided to put our efforts towards achieving the Carbon Trust Reducing CO2 product footprint label, primarily because to drive our business on a path to net zero, we know we must measure and reduce the carbon emissions of our products. So what better way to reward decarbonization at the product level than to offer this Climate Pledge Friendly badge as a carrot at the end of that effort? So how do we achieve that? Well, you can't improve what you don't measure. So the first step is to assess the baseline. And we do this using the life cycle assessment framework to assess the emissions of a baseline product, which demonstrates what things would look like in kind of a business as usual case where we take no decarbonization actions. And then we use that to identify the emissions drivers across every stage of the product's life cycle and establish a carbon reduction plan to define specific actions for that particular device, as well as forward-looking actions that can be taken on future generations, but perhaps aren't feasible for this product. That plan is then translated into a specific set of requirements, which becomes part of the broader set of requirements for the product alongside all the other features. So it's baked into our process from start to finish. It's not a separate policing mechanism. We then do an estimated life cycle assessment for this new product, including these actions, to assess whether this meets the threshold for carbon elimination and to understand any puts and takes. Sometimes we add a new feature to a product that can offset some of the gains with our carbon elimination strategies, and we need to make sure that on the whole, we're moving the needle forward in the right direction. If it passes that threshold, the product development team then has a clear set of targets to design and validate as we build and test the device. Towards the end of the development cycle, we then do a final LCA, or life cycle assessment, which the Carbon Trust then assures in comparison to the baseline LCA before certification is granted. So let's walk through some of these carbon elimination strategies to give you a sense of the types of actions this has driven us to take across our business. When you think about how to make a device more sustainable, you might naturally think about what materials are used to make the product and how it's disposed of when it's no longer in use. But it's important to let the science guide us here. So we're inspecting the full life cycle of the device. First, we look at the bill of materials for products and their packaging, and the manufacturing processes that turn those materials into a product. Then we look at the transportation of the product, both from the factory to fulfillment centers, as well as outbound to customers. Next, we evaluate the use phase emissions. So that means the electricity that's used in customers' homes to power and charge our devices. And last, we look at the distribution of devices we project to be traded in, recycled, or landfilled. And when we went through this process for our whole portfolio, we found that on average, more than half of our total carbon footprint comes from the electricity our devices use to operate in customers' homes, followed next by emissions generated by the materials and manufacturing processes. And so these are the big areas that we focused on. So let's start with the biggest hotspot in our portfolio, which is the electricity used to power and charge our devices over their lifetime, which is often overlooked by companies. And we knew that to tackle this, first we had to make our devices more energy efficient. They need to just simply use less power. And that's why we developed low power mode, which is on all of the latest generations of Echo and Fire TV devices launched in 2020 and 2021. And we've even been pushing the feature out to older devices already in customers' homes to extend the impact and deliver energy savings to customers. By the end of this year, over half of the Echo and Fire TV devices in customers' homes will have low power mode. But reducing the electricity consumed isn't enough to get to net zero. We could, of course, buy carbon offsets to address the remaining emissions, but we wanted to think about this differently. And we can build off-site renewable energy like wind and solar farms to address the electricity used by our own business operations like buildings and data centers. Could we take the same approach to address the electricity used by our devices in customers' homes? Putting new renewable energy into the grids where our devices are used is more directly addressing the emissions, essentially greening the grid on behalf of our customers. We've committed to matching 100% of the energy used by all Echo, Fire TV, and Ring devices with additional renewable energy generated by new wind and solar farms. So by 2025, we'll be creating 5 million megawatt hours of clean electricity, which is enough to power about 400,000 US homes every year. We don't use our renewable energy generation as part of our product footprint certification today, so we want to keep our products on the hook for energy efficiency improvements, but it's a critical part of our overall path to net zero. We also had to think about the materials used to make our products and our packaging. We've now launched products that include recycled plastics, fabrics, metals, and rare earths, and we're working on even more going forward. And we're working to make our packaging more sustainable as well by reducing waste to ensure our packaging is 100% recyclable by 2023, and sourcing the wood fiber-based materials, paper and cardboard, from responsibly managed forests or recycled sources. One of the longer poles in our journey is moving our supply chain towards lower carbon, lower waste manufacturing, but it's incredibly important and we're making really good progress. This year, we helped several of our biggest final assembly sites reach zero waste to landfill certification, and we'll continue to partner with our suppliers to expand on these improvements in the future. For end of life, we also offer customers ways to manage products that they no longer want to use. Instead of throwing them in landfills, we can help customers trade them in for a gift card or recycle the device for free. And that's true not just of Amazon devices. We'll take all electronics from any brand back to recycle, and many even qualify for our trade-in program. So let's look at a case study and sort of put all of this together. This is a theoretical Echo Show device, and you can see in the blue bars the emissions of the prior generation device before sustainability actions were taken, and the orange shows the improvements made by taking these steps, giving us the total emissions per unit. We then divide that by the forecasted life of a product, which is modeled based on device engagement metrics, historically, forecasts, using a modeling technique we've developed. And this includes improvements we've made to the reliability of the product or participation in our trade-in program to extend the average product life. And this gives us the carbon emissions per use year, which factors in the benefit for products that last longer, which is an important vector we can't lose sight of. We want our products to use and delight in our products for as long as possible, to not be on the upgrade treadmill. So it's critical that we reward smart trade-offs. We have achieved Climate Pledge friendly badging on most of our new launches over the past year, and we've even worked to certify some of our popular accessories like tablet covers and stands for Echo Show. We're proud to partner with third parties like Carbon Trust to help us distinguish more sustainable products. It matters to customers, and it's truly been a game changer in developing sustainable mechanisms to incentivize and drive decarbonization of our products. But we didn't stop at just badging. We really want to be transparent with customers so they understand exactly what we did and how that varies by product. So the attributes designed into each product are a little different, and we're highlighting that on product detail pages, from things like low power mode to the participation in our Alexa energy dashboard to recycled materials. And that's all in addition to the Climate Pledge Friendly badge for customers that want to dig that one level deeper. By decarbonizing each individual product, and with programs like our renewable energy matching, we are on a path to cut our carbon intensity, or the average carbon emissions per device, by half by 2025, as compared with our 2019 baseline. We're moving quickly by embedding sustainability into every stage of our development process and leveraging clear incentives and product-specific targets. We're thrilled about our momentum and the momentum we see across the industry, but we know this is only the beginning. We have so much more work ahead of us. But with this model, I'm confident we can continue solving hard problems to move along on our path to net zero. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rachel. Really great to hear about Amazon's sustainability journey and how the partnership with the Carbon Trust, specifically on certification and labeling, enables Amazon to talk about the environmental impact of their products to their consumers. So certainly a lot of takeaways on how to think about the life cycle of your products, measuring the emissions, but most importantly, managing and reducing them. I also wanted to mention, thank you also for your questions in the chat. Just in the interest of time, we're happy to follow up on these after the session via email. I'm now very pleased to introduce you to our next speaker. We'll hear from Christian Didier, who's the Nature and Sustainability Finance Director at Danone. So in his role, Christian is leading the monitoring and the disclosure of company extra financial performance. He has been focusing on enabling decision makers across the company and across the organization to allocate resources in line with strategic plans, not only on climate change, but also things like water stewardship, regenerative agriculture, and also circular economy. Christian is also the finance director of the Danone Ecosystem Fund, which is a social impact fund supporting over 90 projects in 33 countries. Christian has a procurement and business development background built through experiences at Deloitte, at A.T. Kearney, Kraft Foods, and Danone, both in France and in the Netherlands. And yeah, I'll now hand over to him to talk about Danone's sustainability roadmap and how they are communicating climate action to their clients.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christian Didier. I'm in charge of sustainable finance for Danone. I hope you are having a very interesting day on this Route to Net Zero event. Thanks a lot, Carbon Trust, for the invite. I will share with you a few thoughts on how Danone has been working on improving the monitoring of its environmental performance over the last years. Maybe a very quick reminder about who is Danone. Our vision is that planet and people are interconnected, that the health of the planet goes together with the health of the people. This is supporting our mission, bringing health through food to as many people as possible. You see here a few examples of our product ranges, including early life nutrition, advanced medical nutrition, our fresh dairy products, and our plant-based offer, and finally our packaged water brands. If we want to summarize the main areas where we are quite active in terms of nature agenda, the first one is climate. So we are committed to fight climate change and to consequently reduce our carbon emissions. You might know as well that we are very active in the area of protecting water cycles with many actions on the watersheds we operate in. Circular economy, two main priorities, one around the co-building of circular economy of plastic. So how do we work with different actors, being suppliers, being customers on this direction, without, of course, forgetting our priorities on food waste. And finally, agriculture, which is a very important battle for us, given our environmental footprint driven by agriculture. We are very much convinced that regenerative agriculture is part of the solution to the challenges we are facing as a company. If we focus now on climate, we have an ambitious climate strategy with a target in 2050 to be net zero. Three main levers: reducing our emissions, fostering the increase of sequestration of carbon in soils, and finally offsetting our remaining emissions. You might know that we have announced in 2020 that we have reached our peak of emissions, which was ahead of the planning we had. And if you are looking at the right side of the slide, you will have some idea about the breakdown of our carbon footprint. As you might see, our scope 1 and 2, so the emissions which are mainly driven by our factory and warehouses, are relatively low. They are less than 5% of our total footprint, which means that our scope 3 is really the company challenge. And within the scope 3, roughly 60% of our footprint is driven by agriculture. So this is why agriculture is a very strong topic for Danone, with a very strong focus, as you may imagine, on milk. Back in 2019, we thought that we had a case for change in driving our ability to monitor our carbon footprint, our water footprint, our energy footprint. Two kinds of challenges. The first one was on systems. We had two different systems in place, which were the heritage of various moves, changes, upgrades, acquisitions, which was driving a quite high manual workload at all levels of the organization, from the people in the factories, in the warehouses, which were involved in monitoring and reducing our footprint, up to the team in charge at company level to consolidate and assess the action plans. In terms of organization, the organization was scattered at that time in various parts, in various geographies, in various product categories. So really lots of resources across the organization, which were putting too much energy on what I name feeding the beast. So updating system, giving numbers, I would say building quite complex analysis, rather than investing more time into changing the game, into driving roadmaps, into setting up the targets required to achieve our ambition. So we had these two challenges, which were kind of limiting our ability to go further in animating our performance. So we took the decision actually to launch a company-wide project, which was named Green Track. And the ambition was really to move from reporting our environmental performance to monitoring our performance, to be able to make the right decisions, to be able to allocate our resources on the topics, the actions, the priorities, which were really delivering the most. What did we do? We had three kinds of actions. First of all, we really wanted to reset our way of working by using recognized standards, which were really taken as they are defined, without reinventing the wheel, without adding complexity through internal specifications. So we really wanted to simplify our internal disclosure And obviously, we have adopted the greenhouse gas protocol at organization level, which was a bit different from the product level we had before. And we have also developed an internal accounting standard for carbon, which is audited and which is widely shared across the organization to make sure that we have a consistent approach based on the latest standards. The second action we have taken in our research was to use systems which were standard and flexible. Why standards? Because we absolutely wanted to make sure that we are not creating more complexity than the real need we had to monitor our footprint. And we are also convinced that the regulation, the standards, the requirements on measuring and disclosing our performance are evolving quite frequently. So it was quite key to be able to have our systems follow the trends and keep pace with the evolutions of the performance framework we will have in the future. One system for the company, full automation as much as possible. So being able to link and find data where it is. And obviously, given the number of countries we operate in, we went through multiple, I would say, co-building and co-testing with some big countries. And finally, and maybe it's the most important lever, how did we work to manage the change with our teams? There was really a very strong intention to focus resources on what creates most impact. We made sure that we have resources where the leverage is. So we wanted really to give the opportunity to each of our local businesses to drive its own roadmap, its own continuous improvement. So it was very important to make sure that we had the decision points where decision is made at the same time as new investments, capacity, innovation, whatever. So really where the resources are allocated, super important to have the nature decisions at the same place. And we also invested specifically in areas where we think that our performance was critical to reach our targets. At that time, we had 2 physical trainings. It might seem quite exotic in COVID times, but 3 years ago, it was possible to gather lots of people in one place. And it was also the occasion to test some video conferences or remote training, which was at that time not as common as it is today. What were the results? 3 kinds of results. First, a much stronger collaboration than before. So all data is today checked by at least 3 levels within the organization, which really allows to build on robust data and to make sure we have a full ownership of the results. It allows as well to have a much easier benchmark across the organization between factories, countries, per categories, which is a driver for continuous improvement and higher performance. In terms of efficiency, we are able to simulate our performance before, of course, the closing of the year. What is super important as well is that we have killed over 1,000 Excel files just because we have given transparency on data, we have given full availability of resources to the whole organization. And as a consequence, other non-financial reporting campaigns merged with this tool because we were able to have one common platform for the whole company on all extra financial performance. In terms of impact, we could increase the scope of reporting because as we were offering a much easier way to monitor performance, more countries within Danone could join. We are able today to estimate our performance of the year during the course of the year around mid-year, which is very interesting to take potential corrective actions if need be, and again, to allocate resources differently. And finally, one topic which is quite interesting for Carbon Trust is that it simplified a lot the certification, the neutrality certifications of our brands, which we could lead 3 times faster than before, just because we had the right set of data prepared on time. So as a conclusion, what is the result of this 2-year journey? The result is that we think we have reinforced the ability of the organization overall to decide on priorities, on new projects. So we have really made our data and our monitoring of environmental performance much stronger, to the benefit at the end of consumers and of the roadmap we have built on our nature performance. As we have been able to launch new projects, we have launched this year a new financial KPI, which is adjusted earning per share, so the carbon adjusted value of the EPS. We have had new brands joining the carbon neutrality journey, for example, Horizon in the US, Caricare in New Zealand, Volvic, which is a brand sold in many countries in Europe. So we think that the ability we gave to the organization to make decisions was really the first step to the acceleration of our roadmap, of our ability to make a change in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. So another great example of implementing your climate goals really into the core of how you do business. Really exciting to hear about Danone's carbon credentials and how you've implemented this into your communication strategy. And we've had some general questions in the chat on sort of third-party certification and labeling. So if you're interested to learn more about that, please feel free to explore some of the links that we have provided at the bottom of your page. So I'm now inviting you to listen to our last speaker for this session on demonstrating action on providing transparency to consumers. I'd like to introduce you to Erik Elvingsson Hedden, this time speaking to you from Sweden. Erik is the managing director and founder of Sustainable Brand Insight and the Sustainable Brand Index, which is Europe's largest brand study on sustainability. So he has worked with sustainability for over a decade and now has insights into more than 1,400 brands across industries and across countries. So based on these insights, Erik will talk about how sustainability affects brands, how it affects communications, but also business development and sales. So please enjoy the final speaker for this session and listen in on SB Insight's consumer research and their takeaways.
Hi there. So I'm Erik Elvingsson Hedén from Sweden. By the way, I'm the managing director and founder of a company called SB Insight, and it stands for Sustainable Brand Insight. I'm here today to share with you some insights on consumer behavior and brands and sustainability. So basically, how do people behave when it comes to sustainability, consumers, and how to build a sustainable brand in order to attract those consumers in the future and today, of course. First, just a bit about ourselves and myself, but also the company. So as you might guess from the name, we're an insight agency and we're on a mission to create sustainable brands. So we're helping companies and brands to, transform from this perhaps being regular brands to becoming sustainable brands, because that is quite a challenge for many companies and many brands. We work in these countries, so these 8 countries primarily. We do work also in the UK and Germany and other countries as well, sometimes depending on the clients, but our home markets are these 8 markets. So the Nordics, we started out in Sweden back in 2011. And then we entered our neighboring countries in 2013, so Norway, Denmark, Finland. And then in 2017, we entered the Netherlands, which is, of course, a bit further away from the Nordics, but relevant because we do see that consumers there are quite similar in terms of sustainability, interest, and behavior, similar to the Nordic consumers. So that was an interesting market for us. And then just 2 years ago, we entered the Baltic countries, so Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So those are our home markets, and there is also where we perform our big study, Sustainable Brand Index, which I will share with you in just a brief moment. Just to give you a bit of an idea of what we do, why we do what we do, the reason behind it, we have this perspective that we call the sustainable perspective. Basically, it means that what we see when we look at the market and companies and brands, we see that sustainability has gone from being yesterday, so to speak, from being separate from the brand and even irrelevant, to be honest. You could go about making business, selling as much as possible to as many people as possible in as short a time as possible, basically, no matter the consequences. And today we're witnessing an integration of sustainability into the brand. So basically we do see that, of course, depending on the market, the country, so to speak, there is we would say that when we look at, for example, the Nordic countries, we do see that sustainability and the perception of how sustainable you are is the single most important matter when it comes to how you perceive a brand today. So that's the integration that we see. And of course, we hope for and strive for a tomorrow where we will only have sustainable brands on the market. So basically, we won't distinguish between a brand and a sustainable brand, but those two will be synonymous, so to speak. And we won't even talk about sustainability, basically, which is, of course, the target, I would say, for all of us working within this topic. So that's the foundation of our company and also our work, so to speak, this kind of perspective and view on the world and how it's changing. Like I mentioned, we do many things, but one of the things and the thing that I'm going to focus on today is is our biggest study. It's called Sustainable Brand Index. Today, it's Europe's largest brand study on sustainability, which we're very proud of. And basically what we do is that we survey and analyze how people perceive a lot of brands within sustainability, and also, of course, how they view sustainability, how important it is within many different industries, etc. So I will share with you some insights from that study in just a while. First, I would just like to share with you also how we do it, just to give you a brief idea of how we perform Sustainable Brand Index. So basically, it's a very big study, as I mentioned, based on both desk research, meaning that we do a lot of trend analysis and looking at what's happening, regulations, trends in the world, etc., because that's also relevant for when we interview consumers and the questions that we ask. Then we do several quantitative web surveys. That's where we interview people in these 8 countries that I mentioned before. So all in all, this year, 2021, we interviewed more than 60,000 consumers in those countries, bit different sizes depending on the country. The Swedish study is still the biggest one, for example. And the target group is the general consumer, so to speak. So it's a nationally representative sample of each population and between 16 and 75 years old in each country. And all in all, we asked them about more than 1,400 brands distributed in 35 different industries, and of course across these 8 countries. So a lot of brands, a lot of countries, a lot of industries. And also we do have a lot of consumers that we interview because we want to, of course, spread the questions. No one answers all the brands. That goes without saying, I hope. We choose the brands. We choose it based on market share and brand awareness. So you have to be basically a big, famous brand in your industry to actually make the list, so to speak. And once again, this is important to emphasize that we measure perceptions of what people think, feel about your brand, so to speak, not how you actually perform. And that's another, of course, interesting study. So let's dive a bit into the consumers and sustainability and how they view it, so to speak. So I have some overarching parameters that I want to share with you. So first one is actually, kind of a sign of interest in sustainability. What we look at here is how much do people talk about sustainability? And as you can see, I'm focusing on our key markets, I would say, so Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, and the Netherlands. It's good for you to just remember. So basically, we do see there are a few things here that I want to share with you when it comes to what does this mean and what do we see here. So basically, first of all, as you can see, there are different levels depending on the country. We do see that, for example, the Netherlands and Sweden are the at the top, so to speak. That's where most people talk about sustainability with friends and family, etc. The other thing I want to share is that you can see the trend, apart from the Netherlands, a bit different, also a bit shorter trend. But for the Nordic countries, you do see that the trend is very, very similar. Even though it's different levels, it's very, very similar in the country. So we do understand, you may derive from that of course, there are a lot of what is happening on a macro level, what's happening in the world, so to speak, and that affects a lot the interest and the talk about sustainability. So for example, the data point for 2016 was heavily influenced by the climate meeting in Paris in December 2015. That's, you know, that really heightened that the data there. Then other reasons, but we did see that in 17, 18, we did notice that a lot of focus was on Donald Trump as a president, but also the focus on North Korea, nuclear war, etc. So other issues were a bit more pressing, so to speak, than sustainability, according to some consumers at least. And then we had a big increase again between 2018 and 19, as you may see. That was solely driven by the focus on climate change, and Greta Thunberg, of course, as one vocal activist in that movement, so to speak. And then, as you can see, this year, 2020 to 2021, we do see a decrease. So we see a bit of a less talk about sustainability in all the countries. Not surprising, I would say. This is due to the pandemic, COVID-19, and we do see that some consumers, those that are no longer here, so to speak, no longer talking about sustainability, they have focused more on that, and they don't see it as a sustainability issue, so to speak, either. However, what's interesting, even though there is less talk, we do see that the interest is higher. So this, I would say, is very positive. When we ask people, what is the direct effect of the pandemic when it comes to your interest in sustainability, we do see that in all these countries that we focus on here, there is a bigger part, or more than a third in most countries, except Denmark, that say, yes, I do think that the pandemic has increased my interest in sustainability. And that's very positive, I would say. And when we look a bit deeper into these people, we do see that the reason is that they actually draw the line. They make some kind of a mental line between, you know, the fact that we exploiting the earth, our planet is in a bad shape, and we are in the midst, or hopefully in the end, if we may be lucky, of a pandemic, so to speak, that those two are interconnected. That's not a coincidence, so to speak. So that's how people reason, and that's the reason why they think that, you know, their interest is actually higher now. Of course, we want to know what is the interest focusing on, and I mean, yes, health is one thing that they mentioned. This is the interest has increased in health, and that's quite natural due to the nature of a pandemic, so to speak. However, we do see that almost to the same extent they do focus on climate change. They see that climate change has really gathered their interest or drawn their interest in the last year. So that's also on the same level, so to speak. And otherwise, we do see also that recycling as a particular topic, but also circular economy and circularity as a whole is something that they also prioritize much more now than they did before the pandemic. So these areas are three big winners, if I may say so, when it comes to increased interest among consumers in these countries. And of course, I also want to share with you a bit like how sustainable are the consumers today, because that's of course very relevant. Attitude is one thing, behavior is a completely different thing. So what we have done, I'm not going to share in detail how we do it, but basically we have the foundation here is a behavioral study where we watch people, observe them in a retail environment and how they behave. And then we interview them afterwards to see, you know, who are these people, the people that perhaps read a lot on labels and, you know, really interested in what they're buying. Who are they? Can we see some characteristics for those people? So basically, when we did this in first time in 2013, so a long time ago, we identified these 4 segments, and then we named them: ego, which is, you might derive, not very interested in sustainability; moderate, kind of the in-between person; smart, and then dedicated. Yeah, so you might guess who they are. And of course, we do not ask people if they're ego, because then no one would be in that group. So this is just names that we have put on it after. And just to share with you a bit of how these groups are, you know, what characterizes them, and also how big they are. And this is, of course, for ego, we see that, you know, this is a group, they're not generally interested in sustainability, but they do value some aspects of it, especially when it comes to like national aspects, like domestic production, local production, work environment in the own country, so to speak. So it's a very national focus, so to speak, which is so. But they don't really like the word sustainability. It's a bit politically correct to them, so they don't really like it. This group is around 25% for these countries. Of course, it's a bit different depending on which country, but that's the average. It's gone down over the years, so it's a positive development in that sense. The moderate group, which is kind of the in-between group, we call it a follower group. They're somewhat interested in sustainability, but they don't drive the change. They're not going to be the ones driving this change in the future either. So they really look at what others do, and if it's something that is, all right to do now in terms of sustainability, they want to try that too. They follow, so to speak. And this group is kind of 40%. So and that's been quite steady over the years. And the reason is that, egos become moderate, and then some also leave the moderate group to become smart. So that group has increased, as you may see here. It started out around 15% back in 2013. So it's been quite a good increase up until now. So this group is curious about sustainability, interested in sustainability, but always with what's in it for me perspective. So they always want to get satisfied when it comes to what's the value with sustainability for me. So it's not sustainability no matter the cost, so to speak. That is rather the last group, this dedicated group that are passionate about sustainability. They never compromise on it, and they're around 10%. So it's a small group. However, we do see a growth. It started out around 5-6%. So we do see a growth, and we also see that this is the Gen Z, so the really young ones are the ones, not all of them obviously, but many of them ending up in this dedicated group. So I would say that this group is actually going to grow from maybe being a group that you have to risk manage to actually address from a customer perspective as well. So let's have a look also a bit into what are the drivers for sustainable behavior. So what do you need to do to actually make them be sustainable or make them want to be sustainable? So for the ego group, it's very much about simplicity. It has to be simple. It has to be very functional. It has to be connected to that. And it also has to connect, not always, but often, to domestic value. So domestic production, local working opportunities, for example. With the moderate group, this kind of average group, the price is, of course, very important, the function as well, but also the lifespan. They want to be able to say, hey, this is good quality, so it lasts for a long time. And then, of course, that's something we can connect to sustainability as well. And with the smart group, very, very focused on quality service. Again, I'm mentioning this, what's in it for me perspective. They never want to compromise on quality service, but they want that to go hand in hand with the sustainability aspect. And they also into status. So they would do, to some extent, want to say that, hey, I bought this product and that's, part of who I am. And this goes hand in hand with my personality. I'm a sustainable, responsible person. And they're also very triggered and interested and occupied, basically, about climate impact. And then the last group, of course, sustainability and also having an impact by themselves, so to speak. Their behavior is very important, and how that affects the sustainable development as a whole. So then, of course, you have to think, like, how do we talk to these people? Because with the dedicated group, you focus on sustainability, maybe only, whereas the smart is a bit of a balance. Moderate ego, much more focused on like what's good for them, what's in it for them, maybe not driving the sustainable message that hard. It's just something that goes with it, so to speak, but you focus more on the price or the function or the lifespan or the simplicity, so to speak. But the further you go to the right here, the more you can talk about sustainability and sustainable values, so to speak. And speaking about communication, to end this off, just want to talk to you briefly about how to build a sustainable brand, because we have this framework, and I'm not going to be able to share all of it with you, but basically what we do see are 5 different parts that you have to focus on. First is the brand and the strategy, of course, like building a brand and communicating about sustainability, very much based in who are we, what is our identity, and what does it mean for how we talk about sustainability. If you're a big company with a big market share, that's how you should talk, not as you were a startup, for example. Then, of course, you need to have a journey where we're going. This is where we're heading. These are our targets and our milestones to get there. Not only talking about 2030, but actually what's happening this year and the next year and the year after that. Then, of course, materiality areas, like what are our key areas, where do we have most of our impact, and how can we engage around those areas. And then, of course, as always with communication, target groups. Who are we talking to? Are there specific groups? Of course, these different group value different things, so you have to be very cautious about that. And at the very end, the communication. That's maybe the biggest challenge today, because we do see a lot of sustainability communication. Most of it is not very trustworthy, not very credible. So we do see that it's very generic, and people are actually starting to question that more and more. So it's very much about how can we be more efficient and more engaging when it comes to communication. And if you look at the long-term perspective, to end this off, to summarize, we do see that there are two key success factors for brands that have actually managed to build a sustainable brand and really integrating this into their brand in the eyes of consumers. So the one thing is focus on, these are 1, 2, 3, not more areas where we focus and where we have a huge impact and where we communicate. So keep that focus, choose and also remove some things. And then the other one is consistency. This takes a lot of time. Communicate and do it over several years. Don't change it year by year, but you have to stick to your guns, so to speak, and really talk about it year over year. And it's going to be boring internally, unfortunately, but that's just the way it is. That's how it is if you want to be impactful when it comes to building a sustainable brand. All right, my time is up, I think. So here's where to reach me if you have any questions. Otherwise, I thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eric, for some great insights on how sustainability affects brands, affects reputation and sales. Fantastic to learn more about SB Insights consumer research, and hopefully valuable input for all of you. So this brings us to the end of this session, and I think we have a closing poll for this, but I'd like to invite you to take part in. So we've been talking about the role of the consumer in this session, how there is an increased demand for really information on the sustainability performance of businesses, on carbon credentials, on products. And we'd also like to ask yourselves now, as a consumer, would you be more willing to purchase from carbon labeled brands? Now, with that, thank you very much for listening in on this session on demonstrating action, on providing transparency to consumers on your route to net zero. We've heard from 4 fantastic speakers who provided us with valuable insights on the role of the consumer and talked about great examples of how carbon labeling can help you communicating your actions with confidence and with credibility. I'll now hand back over to Ralph, our host, to introduce the next speaker, and I hope you do enjoy the next session. Thank you.